Hi everyone, I'm Mike, and welcome to Sci-Fi Travelers. Today's story begins in a city made entirely of mirrors, a place where no one looks directly at anyone else, where you navigate the streets through reflections, and where every window shows you hundreds of versions of everyone, but the real thing is never seen. And at the center of all this glass lives a queen, seen by tens of thousands of people every day, yet recognized by none. Ready? Let's begin. She shyly asked to sit by me. I didn't know she was a queen. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from watching yourself misjudge a drink in 40 mirrors at once. I know this because I had achieved it that evening, in the wayside hall at the edge of the mirror flats, where I sat nursing something the color of regret and roughly the temperature of a grudge. My name is Adrian. I am a cartographer by trade, and I would like it noted for the record that a cartographer stranded on a world with no fixed directions is the universe's idea of a joke told slowly, with a straight face. Over the course of several weeks, my ship had left without me. I want to be fair to the ship. It had waited. It had, in fact, sounded 3 separate departure tones while I was in the lower market arguing with a light merchant about whether the road I'd purchased actually led anywhere or merely appeared to, which on speculum is a distinction with enormous financial consequences. By the time I understood that I had bought a reflection of a road, a very good reflection, admittedly crisp and convincing right up until you tried to walk down it, the sky had closed over the launch spires and my berth was a bright dot ascending into someone else's problem. So, speculum. Let me try to describe it the way I'd have wanted it described to me before I came, which is to say, honestly and with warnings. Imagine a city built by people who decided, at some ancient fork in their history, that looking at a thing directly was hopelessly crude. Everything here is prismatic. The towers are grown from a glass that bends light the way a good liar bends a story, so that the streets you walk are half made of stone and half made of the borrowed image of stone from somewhere 3 blocks over. You do not navigate speculum by going toward things. You navigate it by learning which reflection of a thing is telling the truth, and this is a skill the locals absorb in infancy, and that I, a grown man with a doctorate in the honest depiction of terrain, have the approximate mastery of a duck learning the cello. The worst part, and here I speak as a professional, is that nobody looks at you, not out of rudeness. It's the opposite of rudeness. It's their whole etiquette. To meet a stranger's eyes head-on, here, is about as polite as leaning across their dinner to smell their soup. Instead, they watch your reflection. Everyone in a speculum room is politely regarding everyone else via some tilted pane or silvered pillar, so that a crowded hall has the eerie underwater calm of a place where 200 people are having intense eye contact with each other's ghosts. It took me a full week to stop wheeling around, certain I was being followed. I was being followed. So was everyone. It's called manners, which is the long way of explaining why I'd claimed the corner table. It was the one honest seat in the house, a dead angle, a little wedge of wall where the mirrors couldn't quite reach me and, more to the point, I couldn't quite reach them. You cannot imagine the relief of not seeing your own face until you've spent a fortnight unable to escape it. 40 Adrians, unshaven, jaw doing that thing it does, all of them looking as stranded as I felt. In the corner there was only one of me, and even he seemed grateful for the privacy. I had my useless map spread out, old habit, drawing what I could of a place that refuses to hold still. And I was in that pleasant, self-pitying trance you fall into when a drink stops being a beverage and becomes a small companion, when the light changed. I don't know how else to put it. The hall had its usual glow, that soft interior daylight the prisms strain out of the evening. And then, from the doorway, it gathered, as though the room had quietly agreed to point itself at something. I didn't look up because I was busy and antisocial, and frankly, 3/4 of the way into my new relationship with the drink. I felt the shift the way you feel a tide come in around your ankles while you're staring at the horizon. There was a woman crossing the floor. I registered her only as motion at the edge of my dead angle, but her skin caught the light and did not let it go. Quicksilver is the closest word, and it isn't close. She held the entire room's glow the way a still lake holds a sunset, and everywhere the mirrors ran with her, silver over silver, so that whatever corner of speculum you happened to be watching just then, you were watching her, except me. In my honest, mirrorless wedge, I saw only the plain fact of a person, walking, slowing, arriving at the empty chair across from mine. She paused. When she spoke, it was so quiet I nearly missed it. Quieter than anyone had said anything to me in this loud, reflective city. The voice of someone braced to be told no. "Is this seat free?" And I, cartographer of nowhere, connoisseur of my own bad luck, glanced up for half a second, gestured at the chair with the loose generosity of a man who has nothing left to guard, and said, "All yours. Fair warning, the view's terrible. You can't see yourself from here." I went back to my map. I did not notice that behind her, in every silvered surface of the hall, the whole watching city had turned to look at the one place it suddenly could not follow her into. Before we continue, here's why I kept writing this chapter. I've never had so much fun with two people talking so little. A man unaware enough to even be afraid. A queen watched enough to even be recognized. And a city full of mirrors trying to secretly listen to the one conversation they can't reach. The best part of a love story built on silence is when someone finally breaks that silence. And trust me, when Elena does, you'll want to have been there from the beginning. She sat the way you'd lower yourself onto a bench you suspected was freshly painted. A careful provisional descent, as if the chair might be recalled at any moment by a higher authority. I noticed this only distantly, the way you notice weather while doing your taxes. I was still on my map, still trying to render a plaza that had, by my count, 3 contradictory locations depending on which pillar you consulted, and I had reached the stage of frustration where I'd started drawing all 3 and labeling them, "Pick one." "You're making a map," she said. "I'm making 3 maps," I said, "of one place. It's either avant-garde cartography or a nervous breakdown with a straight edge. Jury's out." There was a silence. I've since learned to read her silences the way locals read mirrors. This one had a texture to it. A held quality, like she was deciding whether the joke was safe to laugh at. Then a small sound escaped her, quickly, almost guiltily, and was gone. I looked up properly for the first time. Up close, she was less blinding and more, I want to get this right, more of a person, which sounds like nothing until you consider I'd spent the evening cataloging the glassware. Her skin still did that impossible thing with the light. But her eyes were just eyes, dark and quick, and they were doing the polite speculum thing of not quite meeting mine, angled a few degrees off, watching my reflection in the drink-polished tabletop instead of watching me. "You looked at me," she said. "When I came in, straight on. Sorry, off-worlder. We're barbarians. Back home, we look at people like animals." I paused. Not like, I mean, the way animals look at things. Directly. Not, you know what? I'll start that sentence over. Back home, looking at someone means you like them, or you're about to fight them. Context dependent. "And which was it?" she asked. And there was the ghost of something under the shyness, a flicker of mischief testing its own weight. "Hadn't decided," I said. "You interrupted a very serious drink." That earned me the sound again. Less guilty this time. I decided I liked being the reason for it, and filed that away as the sort of thing a wiser man wouldn't file. We talked. Or rather, we half-talked, the way strangers do when both of them are hauling something heavy and neither wants to set it down first. She asked about the maps, and I told her about the ship and the reflected road, and the light merchant who had, with a completely straight face, offered me a partial refund in the form of a road that led somewhere slightly different. She listened like listening was a rare privilege she'd been saving up for. When she spoke, it was in these unfinished pieces. It must be strange, to come from a place where things stay, and then nothing. The sentence walking off a cliff, her gaze sliding to the tabletop. "Stay where you put them?" I offered. "Where you put them," she agreed quietly, like I'd handed her back something she'd dropped. It was around then that I noticed the room had gotten strange, and I'd like credit for noticing it all, given my track record. The hall had been comfortably half full when I'd staked my corner. Now it was not empty exactly. Emptying. In the careful, unhurried way a beach empties before weather the locals can smell and the tourist can't. Tables that had held murmuring clusters now held abandoned cups. And along the far wall, at the edges of the prismatic gloom, stood figures I hadn't clocked before. Tall, still, silver-clad, positioned with the deliberate spacing of chess pieces. Not approaching. Just there. Watching everything, and I realized with a slow, cold drip down the spine, watching her, in every mirror at once. From a distance, they seemed determined not to close. My first thought, God help me, was that I'd done something wrong. Okay, I said, lowering my voice, leaning in with the conspiratorial air of a man about to confess to a crime he can't name. Genuine question. Is it illegal here to sit with someone? Did I break a rule? Because those large, reflective gentlemen along the wall have the specific energy of people about to explain a fine to me. She went very still. Because I'll be honest, I pressed on, because when I'm nervous my mouth files for independence. I have already been fined once this week for obstructing a sight line. I stood in the wrong place and apparently ruined a man's view of a fountain 3 streets over that he was enjoying via a system of mirrors. Cost me 9 crescents and my dignity. So if this is another one of those, I'd rather know now, while I still have crescents. For a moment she didn't answer. Her reflection in the tabletop had gone unreadable. Then she looked at me, actually at me, straight on, the barbarian way, which I understood even then cost her something. And the mischief was gone, and in its place was a thing so plainly lonely that my ridiculous joke died in the air between us. No, she said softly. You didn't break a rule. A breath. They keep their distance from everyone. It isn't you. Which was true. It just wasn't the whole truth, and I was too busy being relieved about the crescents to hear the shape of the lie. Before moving on to the next section, pay attention to what just happened. He was asked if he had broken the rule, and he said no, and he wasn't exactly lying. He just omitted mentioning that he himself was the rule. Section 3 is where the ground tilts. A stranded surveyor finally realizes who he's been fooling for 2 hours and must quickly decide whether to give in or stay out of the loop. The moment he chooses will be the moment you'll remember. The thing that gave it away was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 8, and he came skidding into the hall through a side arch the way children arrive everywhere, propelled by some urgent internal news, trailing a flustered adult who was trying to catch a fistful of his tunic. He got 3 steps in, looked up, and saw her, not her reflection, her, straight on, because children haven't yet been taught the crime of it, and he stopped so hard he nearly went over. His whole face opened, and he dropped, right there on the mirror-flat floor, into a bow so deep and automatic that his forehead nearly touched the stone, the movement of a child who has been shown this exact gesture so many times it lives below thought. Luminance, he breathed. Then the adult had him, and there was a scramble of apology, and they were gone, back through the arch. And I was sitting very still with a word I didn't know settling over me like cold water. I looked at the silver figures along the wall. I looked at the emptied hall. I looked at the tabletop where, in 100 mirrored surfaces I'd been too proud of my corner to notice, the entire remaining room was watching the woman across from me. And I did the math a cleverer man would have done an hour ago. Oh, I said. She winced. It was a small, practiced wince, the flinch of someone who has watched this exact realization cross 100 faces and has never once enjoyed the view. Oh, no, I clarified. Adrian. You're okay. Okay. Let me just... I set down the drink, which suddenly felt wildly inappropriate to be holding, then picked it back up because putting it down felt like a statement, then compromised by holding it slightly away from my body like it belonged to someone else. You're not a stranded traveler. No. You're a... The word the child used. That was not a hello ma'am bow. That was a the gods walk among us bow. I've cataloged a lot of bows. That was top tier. I'm the queen, she said. Just like that. Plainly, quietly. The way you'd finally name an illness you'd been describing around for an hour. Of speculum, of the flats and the towers and all of it. A pause. Elena, I have, in my life, been present for several disasters. A pressure dome depressurizing over a moon I was surveying. A dinner where I called an ambassador by the name of the man he'd deposed. The reflected road incident, obviously. And I want you to understand that in the whole catalog, no single second has ever contained as much pure cascading recalculation as the one where I sat there mentally replaying 2 hours of conversation and realizing I had, among other things, told the sovereign ruler of an entire world that her city gave me a headache, mimicked a light merchant's accent, and described my own drink as the color of regret while she watched. I made you laugh at a fine, I said hollowly. You're a queen and I complained to you about a 9 crescent fine. It was a good complaint. I did the accent. You did the accent, she agreed. And there was the ghost of the mischief again, flickering up through the dread on her face like she couldn't quite help it. Here is the part I'm not proud of and the part I am, in equal measure, so I'll give you both. The instinct, the animal instinct, was to bow. To scrape my chair back and drop and start every sentence with the word she'd been called. To become instantly and correctly the 400th person that day to treat her like a fixture, a monument, a face in every mirror rather than a person who had crossed a whole quiet room to ask, almost too softly, if a seat was free. I could feel the performance loading itself into my spine, ready to run. And I watched her watch me load it. I watched her brace for it. That was the thing that stopped me. The bracing. She had folded herself down small in the chair, gone still and glassy and remote, already grieving the 2 hours, already back inside the silver solitude she'd stepped out of to sit with a man who didn't know any better. She was waiting for me to leave without leaving. Everyone did. You could stand right next to Elena and be 1,000 miles off, and she knew it, and she'd made a terrible private peace with it. To hell with that, I thought. Right, I said, and took a deliberate sip of the color of regret. Well, this changes nothing, obviously, because I've already committed all the crimes. Can't undo the accent. So I'm going to keep talking to you like a person, if that's all right, and you can have me quietly removed by the mirror gentleman whenever you get bored. Deal? She stared at me. Straight on. The barbarian way. You can't, she said, and it came out almost frightened. People don't. There's no one who just sits next to you, I said. Yeah, I gathered. Whole hall cleared out, guards doing their statue thing. A child hit the floor like you'd fired a warning shot. I'm slow, Elena, not dead. I noticed. I shrugged, more casually than I felt, which was not at all. Seems like a lonely way to run a planet, seeing yourself in every window and never getting sat beside. So, I nudged the chair she was already in, an inch, a nothing, a gesture. Seat still free. Offer stands. For a long moment, the queen of speculum said nothing at all. And then, very slowly, like something thawing, she leaned the smallest degree closer, and behind her, in every mirror in the hall, 100 watching faces leaned in too, and could not for the life of them understand what they were seeing. The seat is still empty, he said, and hundreds of mirrors bent down to watch the queen do the one thing the whole world had never allowed her to do, sit beside him. But the speculum records everything. A city watching through reflection watched its untouchable ruler draw closer to a stranger as uncharted as any law allowed. And chapter 4 is where the watching begins to cost them dearly. The silent part is ending, and I was waiting to write what happens next. We had 9 days. I know the number exactly because I counted them later. The way you count anything you didn't know was finite until it stopped. They began, absurdly, with me teaching a queen how to get lost. This was my one marketable skill on a world that had rendered my actual profession decorative, not finding places, but the deliberate, disreputable human art of losing them on purpose. You're doing it wrong, I told her the first morning, in a courtyard where the light came down through a lattice of prisms and scattered into something you could almost drink. You navigate by knowing where everything is. That's not walking, that's auditing. Watch." And I closed my eyes and set off across the flat and immediately walked into a pillar, which she found so unreasonably funny that a nearby guard actually took a step forward, alarmed, before remembering he wasn't allowed to approach and rocking back onto his heels with the pained dignity of a man paid to do nothing about anything. She learned, though, or she let herself. Elena had spent her whole life reading the truthful reflection out of 1,000 lying ones, always knowing precisely where she stood because a monarch who loses her footing loses more than her footing. And here was this ridiculous off-worlder insisting there was a freedom in not knowing, in turning a wrong corner just to see what was down it. The first time she genuinely didn't know where she was, a dead-end alley behind the glassblower's row, both of us laughing, neither of us sure how we'd arrived. She looked around at the unfamiliar walls with an expression I'd never seen on her, wide open and terrified and delighted, like someone who has just discovered a room in her own house. In exchange, she taught me to read the light. Real reading, not my duck with a cello flailing, but the actual grammar of the place. She showed me how a speculum tells morning from evening not by the sun but by the temperature of the reflections, cool at dawn, warming toward dusk. How the great towers were angled to pass messages across the whole city in bent light, a language of glints and shadows I'd been walking under, illiterate, for weeks. "There," she said one afternoon, tilting my chin, her hand cool and quick against my jaw, the touch of it landing somewhere behind my ribs. "That flash, off the third spire, that's the harbor telling the market a ship's come in." I looked. I saw it. For one clean moment, the whole maddening city made sense, and I understood I would never have learned it from anyone but her, and that thought had a hook in it I chose not to examine. Because here's the trouble with a city that sees by reflection. It sees everything. I'd been thinking of our 9 days as ours. A private thing, tucked into corners and dead-end alleys, and the honest, mirrorless wedge of that first hall. But there is no mirrorless wedge in speculum large enough to hide a queen, and everywhere we went, we were multiplied, thrown up onto 100 silvered surfaces, and every one of those surfaces had watchers. The whole realm, it turned out, had been quietly watching its luminance do the unthinkable, walk a stranger through her city, laugh in an alley, let a mapless barbarian tilt her chin toward the light, and the realm did not know what to make of it, and things a realm cannot make sense of do not stay quiet for long. His name was Theodore, and he arrived on the 9th morning with the exact energy of a bill coming due. He was one of hers, an advisor, a keeper of the reflected court, some title with too many capital letters, and he was smooth in the way of men who have never in their lives walked into a pillar. He did not look at me directly. He looked at my reflection in a hand glass he carried for precisely this purpose, addressing my image with a courtesy so elaborate it curdled into insult. "The off-worlder," he said, to the small silver Adrian in his palm. "Our stranded guest. How fortunate that Speculum's hospitality has proven so engaging." "I'm right here," I said. "You can look at the big one." He did not. "Luminance," he went on, turning the glass. "The convergence is in 3 days. The whole court has assembled. The delegations from the lower flats, the suitor houses." A pause waited like a stone. "There has been comment on the reflections of late. 2 figures where custom permits only 1, leaning where custom permits distance." He finally tilted the glass toward Elena's image, and his voice went gentle in a way that was worse than cruelty. "A queen is not a private woman. Everything she is seen to do, the realm is seen to sanction. And they have seen a great deal." I watched Elena change. I watched the open, alley-lost, chin-tilted woman of the last 9 days fold herself back down into the glassy remote thing she'd been in that first hall, retreating behind her own reflection like a light going out 1 mirror at a time. She did not look at me. That was how I knew it was bad. She'd gone back to the safe, sideways, mirror-mediated way of not quite seeing me, and after 9 days of the barbarian's straight-on truth, the loss of it was a physical thing, a door closing in a cold house. "Leave us," she told Theodore, and her voice was a queen's voice, and I hated it. He bowed to her reflection and withdrew. And when she finally turned to me, it was not with the mischief or the terror or the thawing lean. It was with a terrible, sovereign calm. "You should go home, Adrian," she said quietly, "while there's still a ship that will take you. You should go home while there's still a ship." That's how he armors himself, getting people away before the world takes them from him. And the cruel joke is, a cartographer has no home to go to. He's been given the only exit he can't use. Chapter 5 is the low point and turning point. This is where a man who joyfully gets lost throughout the whole story finally uses something nobody values, the ability to see blind spots, bad steps, places the city of mirrors can't see. I wrote the whole story to get to this point. I did the sensible thing for about a day and a half. I went to the harbor. There was, it turned out, a ship, a grain hauler bound for a way station 3 jumps toward the kind of space where roads stay where you put them, and its master had a berth and no strong opinions about who filled it. I stood on the launch spire with the cool morning reflections telling me a departure was near, and I thought, this is the exit. She handed it to me herself. "Take it." And I stood there. And I did not take it. And I want to be honest about why. Because it wasn't nobility. It was that I'd spent 9 days learning to read a flash off the 3rd spire. And standing on that harbor, I looked up and understood, for the first time, the message the light was carrying. And it was about her. The convergence. The suitor houses assembling. A whole city arranging itself around the marriage of a woman who had, 4 nights ago, laughed herself breathless in a dead-end alley behind the glassblower's row because a fool walked into a pillar. The realm was about to seal her back inside the silver, permanently, with ceremony, and call it her own free choice. And the terrible thing was that from every reflection, it would look like her free choice, because that's what reflections do. They show you the surface and let you supply the rest. So I didn't board the grain hauler. I went to find out how speculum actually worked, which is the one question my whole useless profession had been shouting at me since I arrived. Here is what a cartographer knows that a courtier does not. Every map has a blind spot. Every projection lies somewhere. You cannot flatten a round world onto a page without tearing it, and the only question is where you hide the tear. Speculum was a city that had flattened its entire self into reflection, thrown its whole existence up onto glass, and I had spent weeks humiliated by my inability to navigate it. But humiliation is just data you haven't organized yet. I'd been walking into pillars for a month. I knew in my bruised and stumbling body exactly where the mirrors didn't reach. I found Theodore's tear in the map on the 2nd night, and it was beautiful. In the way a really elegant crime is beautiful. The convergence was to be held in the Hall of Full Regard, the great central chamber where the light of every tower in the city converged, where the queen would stand at the focal point and be seen, simultaneously and truthfully by every citizen through the vast reflection network. Total visibility, the most watched place on the planet, and Theodore had been managing what it showed. Not lying exactly. Speculum's mirrors don't lie, that's the whole civic religion. But angling, choosing which truthful reflections the network passed along. For a week the realm had been shown Elena beside the suitor houses, composed and sovereign and alone, and had never once been shown the alley, the laughter, the tilted chin. He'd been curating her into the queen the court required, one honest, selected reflection at a time, and the city, trusting its mirrors the way I'd once trusted a road, had supplied the rest. You cannot outshout a thing like that. But you can. If you happen to be the one person in the city who navigates by getting lost, find the angle it forgot to cover. The focal point of the Hall of Full Regard has a blind spot. Of course it does. Every convergence has a center, and a center is a singularity, and a singularity is the one place the surrounding mirrors cannot show. Because to reflect the exact center, a mirror would have to stand where the center is, and then it wouldn't be the center anymore. It's the tear in Theodore's map. The one spot in the most watched room on Speculum that no reflection can reach. A dead angle at the heart of total regard. I got to her the night before the convergence. Not easily. There were the silver mirror gentlemen, and a great deal of ducking through service passages that smelled of hot glass, and one genuinely undignified moment involving a laundry cart that I will take to my grave. But I'd learned this city by losing myself in it, and the guards navigated by reflection, and a man who knows the blind spots can walk through a palace like a ghost. She was alone in an antechamber, dressed already in the convergence silver, and when she saw me, straight on, the barbarian way, because I'd never once managed the other kind, something broke across her face that she tried and failed to fold back down. "You're supposed to be gone," she whispered. "Turns out I'm bad at leaving. It's a whole thing." I crossed to her quickly before the courage went. "Elena, listen. Tomorrow they're going to put you in the middle of that hall and let the whole planet watch you agree to disappear, and it's going to look like your choice, because Theodore's been choosing your reflections for a week. He's been editing you." I saw it land, saw her understand, saw the sovereign calm crack down the middle. But there's a spot in that room the mirrors can't reach. The exact center. The one place no reflection can show. I took her cool, quick hand in mine, and this time I was the one who couldn't quite steady my voice. "So stop letting them show you. Tomorrow, in front of everyone, stand where they can't reflect you, and just say it. Not as a queen in a mirror, as a person. Let them see the one thing the city was built to make impossible." I swallowed. "Let them see you choose." Everything was directed here. A queen seen everywhere, but recognized nowhere. A cartographer who found the only point her city couldn't reflect, and a convergence built to obliterate her in the living mirror. Episode 6 is where she walks toward the center of the planet's most watched chamber, and does the very thing the chamber was designed to prevent. She steps out of the reflection and speaks in her own voice. "The Hall of Full Regard was the most crowded room I have ever stood in, where nobody was looking at anybody. 10,000 citizens packed the tiered galleries, and every single one of them faced not the floor, but the mirrors, watching the whole event unfold in the reflection network the way one is meant to, politely, indirectly, from 1,000 truthful angles at once. The towers had been aligned since dawn. The light of all of speculum poured into that chamber and gathered at its center like water finding the bottom of a bowl. And into that gathered light walked Elena, in convergent silver, alone, to be seen by everyone, and as always, approached by no one. I was in the gallery, wedged between a glassblower and a woman selling candied light. I don't fully understand the local cuisine, with my heart going like a badly balanced engine. Theodore stood at the ceremonial rail below, hand glass ready, a man about to conduct an orchestra of reflections into showing the realm exactly the queen he'd composed. The suitor houses waited in their silver rows. Everything was arranged, every angle was covered. Except one. Elena reached the focal point, and did not stop there, where protocol placed her, where the mirrors could catch and multiply and edit her. She took one more step, into the dead center, the singularity, the tear in the map, the one spot in the most watched room on the planet that no reflection can reach, because to reflect the exact center a mirror would have to stand where she stood, and no mirror can. And she vanished. Not really. She was right there, a woman in silver in a bright room. But to a city that has only ever seen by reflection, to 10,000 people watching the mirrors instead of the floor, their queen simply dropped out of every surface at once. The reflection network, for the first time in the history of speculum, showed the Hall of Full Regard with no queen in it. A gasp went through the galleries like wind through grass. Theodore's handglass tilted, hunting, frantic, finding nothing. He couldn't angle a reflection that didn't exist. His whole beautiful crime depended on her being visible, and she had done the one unthinkable thing and stepped out of sight, which left the citizens of speculum with only one option, an option most of them had never once exercised in their lives. They looked, straight on, the barbarian way, 10,000 heads turning down from the mirrors to the actual floor, to the actual woman, to Elena standing in the flesh in the center of the light with no reflection to hide behind or be edited into. "You can't see me right now," she said, and the acoustics of that hall carried it to every ear. "Not the way you're used to. There's no reflection of me here. So you'll have to do the rude thing, the forbidden thing. You'll have to look at me directly, and let me tell you what the mirrors have not." And she told them, not as a queen in a silvered surface, composed and selected and safe, as a person. She told them she was lonely, that a woman seen in every window of a city and sat beside by no one is not a monument. She is a prisoner of her own visibility. She told them about the alley behind the glassblower's row, and the fool who walked into a pillar, and the 9 days a stranger had spent talking to her like she was made of the same stuff as everyone else. She told them she would not be married into the silver to make a pretty reflection for the realm. And she named Theodore's editing out loud, plainly, in front of the whole watching planet. The one thing a city built on trusting its mirrors could not forgive, because the mirrors are not supposed to choose. Down at the rail, the keeper of the reflected court found that 10,000 people were, for the first time, looking at him directly too. There is no angling your way out of that. He left speculum on a grain hauler within the week, which I thought showed a certain poetry. I'd like to tell you I said something magnificent afterward. I did not. When it was over, when the galleries were roaring and the suitor houses were quietly folding their silver and going home, I made my way down to the floor, and I stopped a polite few feet from her, suddenly and enormously aware that I was a stranded mapmaker in a room that had just crowned its queen's own free will. That was better than the accent, I told her. Nothing is better than the accent, she said. And the mischief was all the way back now, blazing, unhidden. And then Elena, luminance of speculum, ruler of the flats and the towers and all of it, did the thing her whole world had been built to make impossible. In front of 10,000 citizens, in the full light of every tower, with no mirror between us and nothing edited and nowhere to hide, she crossed the last few feet herself, the one who is approached, choosing for once to approach, and she took the seat beside me, metaphorically. There were no chairs. But you understand me. I never did catch a ship home. It turned out I didn't have a home so much as a habit of leaving, and Elena cured me of it the way she cured herself of the silver, by choosing out loud in the light where everyone could see. They gave me a title eventually, something with too many capital letters, but the only one that ever stuck was the one the candied light woman used, the barbarian who looked straight at the queen. I made maps again, good ones, finally, of a city I'd learned by getting gloriously lost in it. And every so often, in a crowded hall full of people watching each other's reflections, a woman with quicksilver skin would cross the room, ignore every mirror in it, and ask me quietly, just to hear me say it, if the seat beside her was free. It always was. Our story ends here, my friends. A queen and a cartographer sit side by side in a city of mirrors that have finally learned to reveal the truth. When I began this story, I thought it was about being seen. But somewhere in that hall filled with tens of thousands of onlookers, I realized it was actually about the opposite, about being recognized, which is far rarer and far more daring. Elena was visible to the whole world, but no one could reach her. A stranger, too insensitive to bother bowing and too stubborn to leave, had to go straight to her and treat her as a human being, not a reflection. And finally, to be able to make a choice for herself, she had to step into the one place no mirror could reach. That's what I've been thinking about, and I'd love to hear what you think. How much of who you are is just the reflection that everyone around you accepts seeing? And if you had the chance, would you have the courage to step right into the middle of it, where no one could manipulate you, and speak the truth aloud? Let's meet in the comments. I read them all. If this story touched you, please click the like button. This helps these stories reach the next reader. And if you're new to our channel, subscribe. Goodbye until the next planet.